Hello, my name is Sophia Kaiser, and my paper is titled Voyeur or Visionary, Exploring Representation of Intellectual Disability in Diane Arbus Untitled Series. I wrote this essay as my final for my first-year writing seminar, Art and Controversy. Throughout the class, we studied a multitude of controversial artworks, either pieces that sparked controversy or were created in the wake of it, and we learned about the various ways to write about and analyze art history. All of this culminated in our final assignment, a research paper analyzing a controversial artwork of our choice and placing it in historical context, ultimately taking a stance on the issue at hand. One of my favorite aspects of this class and this assignment were that they allowed for applying the concepts we studied to our own areas of intrigue, and my interests in photography and disability studies led me to research Diane Arbus' Untitled Series. I was able to synthesize the intriguing life of Arbus, the context surrounding her renowned images, and my own analysis of her work into a holistic opinion on voyeurism or a lack thereof in her art. When I started researching for this paper, I began by looking for specific statements from Arbus herself on the ethics of her photos. These searches yielded unfruitful, and I found myself struggling to take a definitive stance when all I had was the artwork and an abundance of outdated literature about it. It was at this point in my process that I learned how, in writing about art and its role in history, the audience can glean whatever it wants from a piece, and yet they can never truly deduce what the artist's true intentions were unless they were clearly stated by the artists themselves. Considering this, I realized it is much more meaningful to analyze art in respect to the impact it had, rather than the trivial perspectives on what the artist meant or did not mean. So with this in mind, I stopped looking for information about Arbus' intentions and whether or not she was exploiting her subjects with intellectual disabilities, and instead researched the historical context surrounding disability, including the institutionalization norms and the vocabulary surrounding disability in the 1960s in comparison to our standards and language today. Similarly, instead of just using the opinions expressed in the surrounding academia to form my stance, I analyzed the literature itself and the lens through which various scholars view disability in respect to how we discuss it today. By taking on the assignment with a more complex methodology, I was able to analyze the art through two different frameworks, both an antiquated one and a modern one, and this allowed me to take a more nuanced stance on the issue. The most major revising I did in this essay draws on my aforementioned value for disability studies. In discussing disability, I wanted to make sure I was thorough in using politically correct vernacular and doing justice by our standards for people with disabilities today. Even though I was ultimately arguing Arbus' photos are on the right side of history, I wanted to ensure that I wasn't just giving her a pass or failing to acknowledge shortcomings in the photos and potential negative ramifications these flaws could have, even in spite of their overall positive lasting impact. Some revisions I made in order to do so were acknowledging that the same techniques Arbus used to portray casualness and happiness that could suggest disability itself is normal and thus should not be privatized, could also extend to the setting of the images, potentially suggesting that the institutions themselves are happy, ordinary places and thus could be normalized, which would be a very negative consequence. Similarly, in my conclusion, while I wanted to re-emphasize my position, I revised it to make sure it did not ignore the photos nor our nation's shortcomings in regards to inclusion, and I even tried to offer up some specific ways in which the Untitled series could have been more ethical. This paper was meaningful to me in that while I have always been interested in photography and passionate about advocacy for and representation of those with disabilities, I have never considered the possibility of researching the two in tandem until this assignment, and I am grateful for the opportunity to do so and the critical thinking that ensued.